Welcome to the Wednesday, August 18, 2020 electronic meeting of the Ann Arbor Planning Commission. The meeting is in accordance with executive orders from the governor to effect social distancing and mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus. We intend to conduct this meeting similarly to an in-person meeting. However, please be patient if there are technical issues. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 985-7778-7699. This information is also available on the published agenda, in the public notices section of the city website, and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16, AT&T channel 99, and online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. And when you're there, you can select the government channel. Next on our agenda is the roll call.
Commissioner Woods.
Here.
Commissioner Briggs.
Here.
Commissioner Mills.
Here.
Commissioner Milstein. Commissioner Gibb Randall.
Here.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Sauvé.
Here.
Commissioner Abrams.
Here.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt. We do have a quorum.
Very good. On to item number 3, which is introductions. Mr. Leonard, do we have any this evening?
No.
All right. Moving on to approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by Commissioner Sauvé, seconded by Commissioner Woods. Is there any discussion about the agenda? All those in favor of the agenda as written, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. Then that motion carries. All right, next item number 5 is the minutes of previous meeting. Could I have, there were 2 in the packet. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of July 21st and August 5th, 2020 meetings? Moved by Commissioner Abrams, second by Commissioner Gibb Randall. Are there any discussion of the minutes? All those in favor of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, those are approved by all. Item number 6 is reports from city administration, city council, planning manager, planning commission officers and committees, and any written communication. Council Ackerman, do you have any report?
Thank you, Chair Mills. I have reports from our city council meeting last night. I want to give you an update on 3 topics: the Greenbelt, rezonings and site plans, and affordable housing. So with respect to the Greenbelt, city council accepted 2 grants to put conservation easements on one property in Northfield Township and another property in Salem Township, adding to our green belt around the city of Ann Arbor. Turning to rezonings and site plans, 2 rezoning petitions and complementary site plans that were passed from this body with a recommendation for approval to city council were voted through at city council last night. The first was the 3600 block of Plymouth Road, which is the Red Roof Inn and the now closed Big Boy, the redevelopment of that into 2 hotel buildings and a drive-through restaurant. The second was on Jackson Avenue. Again, an old demolished hotel being redeveloped into 2 hotels. Both went through at city council last night. And then turning our attention to, as an aside and transition, I guess, to affordable housing, I'll just let you know that at Plymouth Road, the petitioner actually did offer a set of conditions to the rezoning since it was reviewed by Planning Commission. And I think your conversation helped steer it in that direction. The first set of conditions was that it limited the uses and prevented some of the uses, the allowed uses, the permitted uses in C3 that aren't as viable with the area, things like warehousing, just on a busy corridor like that, not as conducive. And then the second condition was that the developer is providing a $75,000 voluntary contribution to the Affordable Housing Fund, which is a nice transition to affordable housing. Last night, City Council passed a resolution to adopt the Affordable Housing Waitlist Policy. So beginning with Planning Commission's work to incorporate affordable housing units into the 1140 Broadway project, the 15 units of housing there, and then subsequent additions of affordable housing that were included in DDA projects in which the D1 zoning incentives called for the inclusion of affordable housing. We're now going to see coming online affordable housing units built into market rate developments as a function of brownfield or zoning incentives, which I know this body has been part of in a lot of different ways. So because those are going to be coming online in the next year plus, we need a policy to collect applications for the wait lists in a centralized way, and then to distribute them to so it's not each property is managing a separate wait list, but it can be done in a coordinated fashion. So we passed that process and policy last night, which I think is going to be a huge value to those looking for housing. And then the second update, really excited to share that the city did vote to purchase Laurie Terrace. It's 136 units that have been historically senior affordable housing, but those actual legal restrictions have fallen away, and it's just been maintained by a nonprofit entity and board. And it's become too much for that nonprofit to manage. So the city is taking on the liability and will reinstate the legal requirements that it maintain it continue to operate as senior affordable housing. So really, really exciting. It'll be a net increase of affordable housing ultimately, because not some of the units in the building are market rate. We'll of course allow those tenants to stay, but as they transition out for any reason, we'll convert those units to affordable.
Very good. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Mr. Leonard, anything to add?
Nope, no report this evening.
Any other commissioner officers or committee liaisons that have anything to report? All right. Then we're up to item number 7, which is audience participation. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about an issue that is not listed as a public hearing on this agenda. To comment on such other matters, please call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 889. Let me repeat that. 985-7778-7699. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate that you'd like to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. And when you do speak, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we can hear you clearly. And if you can please also state your name and address at the beginning of your comments, we would appreciate it. Again, if you'd like to digitally raise your hand to speak on an issue that's not a public hearing for tonight's meeting, it's *9. All right, going once.
Don't see anything.
Nice. All right. We'll move to item number 8 then, which is public hearings for the next business meeting.
So we've got 2 new public hearings scheduled for the September 1st regular planning commission. The First public hearing is Lockwood of Ann Arbor Plan Unit Development, Zoning and Site Plan for City Council approval. This is a proposed 3-story senior independent living facility with 154 units, 154 vehicle parking spaces on a 7.9 acre parcel located at 2195 East Ellsworth Road. Plan unit development zoning is requested to allow reduced parking and additional density over the existing single family zoning. Public benefits include a minimum of 40% affordable housing, 65 units proposed on site, reduced parking impervious surface, increased open and larger setbacks, and dark sky compliant lighting. The second public hearing scheduled is for proposed amendments to the Unified Development Code. This would be the establishment of a floodplain management overlay district and regulation. This is an ordinance to amend numerous sections of the Unified Development Code to amend regulations and requirements for development in and around floodplains.
Very good. All right, we are up to number 9A, unfinished business. And 9A is a petition, an amendment to Chapter 55 Unified Development Code, Section 5.25, lighting for City Council approval. So we'll have the staff presentation by Mr. Leonard, and then the public hearing.
Okay, included in your packet is proposed amendments to the Unified Development Code as it relates to outdoor lighting regulations. And I would note that the proposed ordinance has been amended slightly from the version that previously appeared on your agenda when it was postponed on July 21st. So the proposed, just to provide a bit of background, what I like to do is provide a bit of background where our current outdoor lighting regulations are, what is proposed under this proposed ordinance, and then just frame a few questions or comments that from staff perspective we have on the proposed changes. So currently, outdoor lighting is regulated through the Unified Development Code. And it is required when a site plan and when any site plan is required, or when the construction cost exceeds 50% of the appraised replacement cost of the entire building, exclusive of foundation. So this would be when you're reconstructing something, perhaps to a significant nature rather than an addition or minor construction project, or specifically when a shared driveway is provided within an easement. Currently, all exterior lighting requirements shall have to be adequately shielded so that no light will glare onto any public right-of-way or any property principally used for residential purposes, and no lighting can be projected onto a property principally used for residential purposes may exceed 0.1 of a foot candle. So regardless of what happens relative to the property where the light is located, that light can't project onto any other property exceeding that limit. Currently, we have parking lot lighting regulations as well that require parking lots are lit from half hour after sunset to a half hour before sunrise. And we stipulate minimum lighting requirements. We stipulate a minimum foot candle requirement and a maximum uniformity ratio. There are a few exceptions under our current code. That is, for non-residential lighting levels, the foot candles can be reduced to 0.4 foot candles after 2 a.m. or after a business closes. And we provide that non-residential use in residential neighborhoods, this might be schools or churches or other types of uses, may reduce lighting levels up to 50% after midnight, also subject to a maximum uniformity ratio. And that is only permissible when approved as part of a site plan. So the proposed ordinance before you tonight really reconfigures how we regulate lighting in a much more detailed way. And I think it modernizes our regulations to a great extent. So first off, the proposed ordinance adds an intent section. The The intents that are highlighted are that it minimizes adverse impacts of lighting, such as light trespass, glare, and sky glow. It promotes energy efficiency, and it fosters a safer environment. This would be a new section to our lighting ordinance. Applicability, it would apply to all lighting. So this ordinance is going to apply to all lighting that provides exterior illumination after sunset and before sunrise. So by enacting this regulation, it is going to broadly apply to all lighting in the city, period. It does propose some exceptions. Temporary light installations on private property is permitted for a total of 90 consecutive days in one calendar year. This would account for things like seasonal decorations or temporary art installations or special events. It exempts any lighting for flags, and it exempts any luminaire, or as we define it, all the aspects of a light that surface or pole to create the light are determined by the Historic District Commission to contribute to the historic character of a listed property. So one of the things that this proposed ordinance adds is specific color spectrum management requirements. So for all non-residential and multifamily luminaires, again, that's the defined term for a lighting fixture essentially, shall have a minimum color rendering index of 70, and all similarly in those same circumstances, all luminaires shall have a correlated color temperature not greater than 3000 K. These are references that measure and rate a light's faithfulness to the pure thermal color spectrum, and where a light's perceived light falls on that color spectrum. That is it sort of more warm or more cool, perhaps, is a very oversimplified way of describing it. This would not apply to 1 and 2 family properties, specifically the color spectrum management. And I would point out, just in my my investigation, often the color rendering index specifically is not provided on bulbs widely available to the public. I anticipate perhaps with time, maybe that it will evolve, but I just raise it as a question that it might be both difficult for property owners to ensure compliance in that way and for us to enforce it. We have a lot of new proposed amendments for luminaire design. I'm sorry that these are small, and I'll just touch on them very briefly. We're now saying that light trespass can't exceed, we maintain the 0.1 foot candle property onto any property in a residential district, but we also add that you can't trespass light beyond that level on a public land district or in the public right of way. We provide a higher level in the D1 and D2 downtown and downtown interface districts. In other districts, we provide a limit of up to 2 foot candles projecting onto those properties. We maintain the requirement that no luminaire can cause glare. And we mandate, depending on the type of surface that's being illuminated, either a fully shielded or partially shielded fixture. That is a fixture designed in such a way where the light is actually being projected onto the desired surface and the maximum to the maximum effect without perhaps as much visual being able to see the actual light source directly. So you would be seeing the effect of that light, but not the light source. We now establish maximum facade illumination levels. We are proposing that we would require, when that happens, that those lights be directed downward rather than upward. Decorative lighting is prohibited between midnight and 6 a.m. unless a business is opened. Business hours extend beyond that. Motion activation of any lights cannot be activated beyond the property boundary. Under canopy lighting shall be fully shielded, and setting in some actual limits on the maximum illumination under a canopy as opposed to minimum requirements under a parking lot, for example. Wall or pole lights have to be no higher than 45 degrees below horizontal. You cannot have any dynamically changing lights or strobe, flashing, blinking, or moving lights. I would note, and I just want to raise this, by exempting temporary lights from the requirements of this ordinance in totality, they would not be subject to this restriction. So you could have seasonal or temporary lighting up to 90 days that might be flashing or strobing or changing. So I know that in the past, there's been some concern from a public safety perspective about sort of distractions when you're talking about such installations that might be seen from a public right of way. But I just want to raise that as a question. As currently drafted, that provision would not apply to anything that's exempt, of course, from the ordinance. Parking lots shall not exceed 6-foot candles and shall be extinguished after hours. That's obviously a departure where now we set a minimum amount of lighting and we require that they be lit through the night. And any safety lighting cannot exceed 2-foot candles. Non-conforming luminaires may be used, maintained, or repaired in the same form and type as they existed at the time they became non-conforming. Enacting this ordinance is going to render a lot of lights in the city non-conforming at that time, if enacted. And what that means is, just like with any zoning regulation, there are going to be inherent rights to be able to continue to use and maintain those lights consistent with how they were previously compliant with the ordinance. When a site plan is required, however, that shall require full compliance with the ordinance, because whenever staff or planning commission or city council is considering a site plan, they are measuring it against all the applicable codes in effect and of regulation at that time. One of the specific things that has evolved from the previous version is that staff is proposing to remove the electrical permit as any sort of trigger of requiring replacement. The status of a light that is in place and in service now and is compliant with the ordinance, an electrical permit is not a determinant factor whether or not it is non-conforming or not non-conforming anymore. So the application of regulations render a light either conforming or non-conforming, and whether an electrical permit is required for that work or any other electrical work shouldn't be the trigger and determinant as to whether or not a light needs to be brought into compliance. So simply, any new light would have to fully comply with the ordinance. Any existing non-conforming light could continue to be maintained and repaired in its current form by right under sort of state enabling legislation and case law about non-conforming uses. And then anytime a site plan is applied, full compliance with the ordinance would be required across the site. A couple of staff notes that I just want to frame for the Planning Commission as you consider and deliberate this. Research has clearly evolved and shown adverse impacts of light pollution, I think, since the initial drafting of our outdoor lighting code. There's a greater body of research about the adverse impacts of sky glow, about sort of human sleep cycles and the light. So I think it's well warranted for the city to be looking at this. This ordinance definitely, I think, evolves from probably not necessarily a research-based perception, but I think a commonly held perception that more lighting equals safety. Research demonstrates that that's not necessarily the case. But I think that that's still a pretty widely held vision by probably many in the community. I just think it's going to be a dialogue point that's going to come up. I spent a little time on non-conforming status. By enacting these regulations, lighting, like any other change in the UDC, is going to result in non-conformities, and there are sort of appropriate rights for non-conforming uses to be able to continue under law. Incrementally, I think this could have the impact of adding cost to development and the result in the affordability of those projects. I do want to recognize that I think in the context of a large site, it is very incremental. But in this circumstance, for example, an administrative site plan that might be a relatively modest improvement is going to require potentially replacement of fixtures if they are not compliant with this ordinance. So I just want to recognize this, that I think it's that I think the city should go into it sort of just eyes open, that this is a great example of a worthy public policy goal that could have some other implications on development overall. And then, of course, by its nature, many of these aspects of regulation are nighttime specific. The city doesn't have active staffing for zoning enforcement during that time. The same thing holds true today, and we do have those requirements. But as we sort of establish additional requirements and more regulations, I just think it's fair to highlight that these regulations aren't going to inherently accompany our ability to have somebody out on the street overnight, making sure that everything's in full compliance. So, but on balance, as indicated in the staff report, we appreciate the work that both planning commissioners, energy commissioners, and environmental commission representatives have put into this. I think it does modernize and move the city's outdoor lighting regulations in a very positive direction. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leonard. Now we'll open the public hearing. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about the proposed Unified Development Code or outdoor lighting amendments. Public comment may be made by calling 1-877-853-5247 and then entering meeting ID 985-7778-7699. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand. You can raise your hand by pressing *9. Mr. Leonard will tell you it's your turn to speak by calling on you by the last 3 digits of your phone number. When you speak, please do move to a quiet area and mute any TV or background noises. And please also state your name and address for the record.
Sally, you have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission, but you're muted currently. If you can unmute your phone. And I will probably keep Sally on after comment as well, given her involvement, if that's okay with the commission, to address any questions once you get into deliberation.
Sounds great.
Brett, I think the muting happens on your end, maybe? No?
I am checking.
Maybe she's trying back.
Yeah. Let's try. We have other callers, so let me try to bring in another caller. Hello, caller with phone number ending in 989. You have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission.
Hi, my name is Heather Good, and my address is 2468 Fernwood Avenue in Ann Arbor, Michigan 48104. I'm the executive director of Michigan Audubon, which is the state's oldest conservation organization. And although based in the Lansing area for work, my home is in Ann Arbor. And so I'm calling in today to thank the commissioners for their work on this and on their follow through on what I consider to be a model lighting ordinance and moving in the direction of a greater, more sustainability minded model. And I wanted to echo the benefits of this for birds and the environment. And as we know, what's good for birds and pollinators is good for humans and the community. So again, on behalf of Michigan Audubon and bird conservation efforts, I want to express our support and encouragement for the approval of this ordinance, and it reflects a commitment to sustainability and to bird conservation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, caller with phone number ending in 654. If you can unmute yourself, and you have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission. Go
Hello,
ahead.
this is John Mursky. Do you hear me?
Yeah, hi, John.
Good evening. So I am an Ann Arbor resident. I live at 505 Burson Place. I'm the chair of the Energy Commission, and I'm a member of the core team which developed the lighting ordinance. I have 3 points I'd like to address. First of all, I'd like to urge the commission to unanimously vote to recommend the lighting ordinance be approved by City Council. It will help achieve the desired objectives outlined by Mr. Leonard. Secondly, the Planning Commission, the Planning Department, and more broadly, other boards and commissions, city administration, and City Council, in my view, needs to reconsider how amortization is handled in its ordinances and in the UDC if Ann Arbor is to achieve important goals such as the A20 carbon neutrality target of 2030 and other environmental sustainability targets. I realize the concerns as outlined by Mr. Leonard about takings and rights of property owners. However, having no or a very long drawn out amortization process or clauses simply won't get us to where we need to be, given the fact that new or redevelopment only impacts a small percentage of our built environment. I think we need a new paradigm. Thirdly, I want to emphasize collectively that we, and I include myself in we, are too slow in developing, approving, and implementing new ordinances and UDC updates. I've been working on several ordinance changes and changes to the UDC, and all of those have been in process for over 2 years. High performance organizations recognize that short lead times, in addition to high quality outcomes, are a must. If we aren't fast, and even if we're working on the right things, or if we aren't fast, and even if we're working on the right things, we will fall behind other high performers. And that also means that we become a higher cost to deal with. This applies equally to municipalities, not to just businesses introducing new products and services. We, and again, I'm looking at myself in the mirror, we have to tackle this problem. So we need to get faster, and we need to get faster fast. So thank you very much, and I appreciate all the work that everybody has put into this ordinance, including the commission itself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sally Uwe, 922 Pauline Boulevard, representing the local advocacy group Michigan Dark Skies, and also the joint working group that drafted this ordinance. And I'd only like to remind the commission of the several people from the community who provided comment on July 21st in support of the proposed lighting ordinance, including members who represent the Bird Center of Washtenaw County and Washtenaw Audubon. I also strongly support all the comments made by the previous 2 commenters, and especially also want to support John Mursky's statements about the need for amortization of non-compliant light fixtures should this ordinance be passed by the City Council. So thank you once again, our gratitude to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Doesn't look like there's anybody else on, right? All right, so we will close the public hearing. I will read the motion. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the amendments to Chapter 55 Unified Development Code, replacing Section 5.25 outdoor lighting and adding Section 5.33.6 non-conforming lighting installations, and adding 13 definitions to 5.37.2 specific terms in order to more effectively regulate outdoor lighting throughout the city. Can I have a commissioner move that? Moved by Commissioner Wood, seconded by Commissioner Milstein. Discussion of the proposed motion. Commissioner Gibrandel.
Mr. Leonard, if you could clarify one thing. So if, let's say, I'm just thinking of a bank downtown, Key Bank, that's on the corner of Main and Huron, and it's a historic building and it has some beautiful uplighting up at the top. Is what you're saying is that if individual bulbs go out, they don't have to change their whole system, but do they have to comply with the light use in terms of hours and things like that? Or does that only apply to new projects?
Technically, it would apply to new projects and any replaced lighting fixtures, because we, by law, have granted certain rights to operate or by minimal regulations. And so while it's much easier for them to comply with things like hours of operation, the nature of it being a light fixture is no different in the eyes of sort of case law via planning and zoning law that a non-conforming setback can continue to exist unless some severe circumstance requires it to be brought into compliance.
Okay, so in other words, if I have a neighbor that has a crazy bright light that's shining into my windows, I can't really tell them to do anything differently until they're ready to change out the whole thing. Is that
Well, currently,
correct?
yeah. Currently, the only restriction we have is they shouldn't be providing glare into your windows, but that is something that I think generally people would know when they see it, as opposed to something measurable, perhaps.
Okay. All righty. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, a couple of things. I know that on the amortization piece of things, there was sort of an attempt made not to make this particularly onerous in terms of some of the provisions that we had in earlier, in terms of how those might play out. Were there any other sort of options that were potentially considered as alternatives?
Sorry. We spent a fair amount of time both with the original language and other options, and it ultimately, electrical permits in staff's view are not a good, they're not a good determinant of when something should be required to make compliant. For example, as the language was originally written, it said a non-conforming luminaire can be maintained and repaired so in its current state. However, it said if any electrical permit for exterior work is filed, then you have to replace it. Well, those two potentially could be in conflict with each other. You could have to get an electrical permit to repair an existing fixture. And so the fact that you need to do an electrical permit once the work gets to a certain scale is not an appropriate way to decide whether that light was compliant under our current regulations and no longer it is. An electrical permit is intended to be just to make sure that any work that is conducted is done in a safe manner. And so it's really on the onus of the UDC to say, at this point in time, these are the fixtures that are permitted. And then if this were enacted, that's going to render all of those non-conforming. But again, just like any non-conformity, we don't have the ability to say, and in 1 year, all of you have to replace your lights in order to be compliant. That's just not the way non-conformities work. So in short, we did look at it. We tried to figure out the right triggers, and we concluded that an electrical permit is not an appropriate trigger to make that decision. The decision is based on the light itself and its evaluation against the regulations.
And one, in terms of hours of operation, right now we're requiring parking lots to be lit all night long. Once this gets passed, we're those regulations are shifting. This does not require businesses that have an existing lighting setup to shift those hours of operation, correct?
No, they could shift to those hours of operations, but again, because they were established under an ordinance where we required those hours of operations, they would have the option to continue to do so. You know,
and that's one piece that I just wonder that that's one piece that I think could make a lot of impact across the community in terms of just, sorry, let me know if you can't hear me. Requiring that piece to be put into place, because that's not necessarily particularly onerous. I think most systems should be set up on timers, even if there was some sort of timing that was phase-in piece. Is there any opportunity to build that in?
I don't think how onerous it is has any bearing on that code application. Mm-hmm. So in short, I don't think that we can parse the sort of operational aspects of this separate from the physical aspects. Something is permissible now, we can't sort of retroactively make it non-permissible. Now, I mean, I would say, as imperfect and as long-term as this regulation is, as frankly as any UDC zoning regulation, it would, I would say, it'd be a step in that direction, because we allow it at least. Because right now, if that parking lot shuts off its lights, it's technically in violation of the code. So, you know, we could look at community education opportunities, but the short of it is, I don't think that just because it's something that might not require a physical expenditure, that's looked at any differently in its status.
And then, I'm sorry that I didn't think about this earlier. This is something that I don't think that we talked about as a committee, but it just dawned in me as in terms of the temporary installations, would something be considered if something like, let's say at a new business operation, you know, there was a new business and they had a temporary light that was, you know, one of those spotlights that's circling and going up, directed up at the sky. Would that, that would be classified under potentially a temporary light installation, right?
A temporary light installation on private property for a total of 90 days. I think that it could meet that definition. I think that it could, yeah, I don't see, I mean, it's a good question. I'm trying to reconcile it with signage regulations to see if that would be sort of interpreted as signage, but I think a case could be made that it falls under this category, that could potentially be permissible for up to a 90-day period.
And I think that was an oversight by our committee. Is there anything that you can think of that would allow us to address that more, because it really is, it's a little bit, it is more of a signage issue, I think, in terms of trying to attract attention to that business.
Yeah, my initial thought would
But
be, just
by
to,
that.
you could identify it as exempt, but still specifically make it, but it still would have to comply with the other provisions. But then that means any seasonal lighting is also going to have to comply with those provisions. So, or you could restrict the exemption to residential districts. You could potentially say that temporary light installations meeting that definition would only be permissible sort of in places where it might not be used for more commercial purposes. But I think the intention is to probably, for this language, is to provide some opportunity for those public uses.
So I'm just gonna let Sarah think on this for a second, or somebody else.
Commissioner Gibrandel, I saw you, but since I have an idea on this issue, so I just wondered, to float by Mr. Leonard, if you can effectively keep the restriction for temporary lights, except that they must comply with that one that's effectively about no strobe, flashing, searchlights. So temporary lights are exempt from everything in the ordinance except that particular provision. Is that possible?
It could, but that's my point. That means if you wanted to do holiday lights, they could also not be flashing or blinking.
And I actually only bring that up because you highlighted that, like, that might be a safety issue, and so I knew that was a loophole. But the
short of it is, I think absolutely that was kind of what I was suggesting, is that you could say such installations are exempt from the provisions of this ordinance. However, they must still comply with section 5.
And I think that's really the only one that's really important to me, or the one that stands out for those temporary installations. I like what you were talking about, potentially differentiating between residential districts and non, but honestly, like, a lot of the classes of things, some of it's the holiday lighting, but there's other classes of things that really would happen in non-residential districts, like temporary art displays. And so that, to make all of those things have to meet everything else in the code, just seems onerous to me. I guess I could make a motion to amend the ordinance specifically to have those temporary light displays comply with the one number that I can dig out, unless you've got it handy, about flashing, not being flashing, strobing. I would move that if anybody wants to second that. Seconded by Commissioner Ackerman. Discussion on that amendment. Commissioner Gibrandel.
So I don't have flashing Christmas lights, but it seems to me flashing Christmas lights are different than a strobe light pointing straight up into the sky to me. There are people with plenty of flashing Christmas lights around, and it doesn't seem as, in the scheme of things, those feel differently to me than, I know the intent was you're driving down a big busy road and there's somebody's, sign out front that's blinking and beeping at you. That's different to me than somebody's Christmas lights blinking. So that are not, generally super bright anyway, compared in the scheme of things to a business, doing it. So I guess that would be my hesitation with that, even though I like it that it's kind of like, oh, we can make this one change and then it's all wrapped up, which I like, because we've spent a lot of time on this thing. And to Mr. Mirsky's point, it's a long time to work out all the kinks. So for me, it's more about the uplighting and this kind of strobe quality of it that is the bigger problem with it than the blinking. But it's probably hard to make it, I don't know if other people, I also am not going to die on this hill. So if somebody else has an opinion, I'm perfectly open to it. So, and I do have something else to say, but let's finish this and then we'll move on to that.
Commissioner Woods?
I was just going to agree with Commissioner Gibb Randall that, you know, around the holiday time, people have a lot of twinkling, flashing, whatever. I mean, you know, you buy them like that. So I don't know if this is where we want to, you know, it's a very good ordinance, and I would hate for it to become the big point of discussion about it. So if there's a way to sort of avoid that, I'd be in favor of that.
I wonder, given, I agree. That's why I wasn't going to bring it up unless Commissioner Briggs did. Is this one where only temporary installations that are in non-residential districts should comply with this? I mean, what that means is that you couldn't have blinking Christmas lights in you know, commercial districts. And if you had a house in a commercial district, then, but I don't know if that, how you feel about that. Because again, this is not the hill that I want to die on. This needs to be passed. All of this is an improvement from what our current situation is. And so,
I would just also say the nature of this, as I anticipate probably some more conversation about the nonconformity and sort of amortization questions, but in this regard, because of its temporary nature, I would say that if it were enacted like this and it turns out that the community experience is adverse, changing the permission of a temporary installation is quite different from a permanent affixed light to a building. So I just say that as if it were enacted sort of as it is currently drafted, for example, and the community experience generally is fine or adverse, this is an area that I think that with all understanding of Mr. Mirsky's concerns about how long things can take, it's something that could be revisited, and that would have sort of a more immediate impact because it would be turning a switch to say you could do this temporary thing now, but by its nature, it has to be temporary. So no sort of long-term use is established in that regard. If that makes sense. I hope it does.
yeah, I just wasn't sure whether that was a suggestion that it doesn't hurt to put it in now and then we can strike it later, or it's go with what we have and we can put it in later if we realize that people are putting the key concern right here is right, like the strobe lights and the searchlights. So I just couldn't read. I didn't get that. Commissioner Briggs.
I would recommend that we just, if we continue with this amendment, which I think would be useful, but to have it pertain just to commercial areas where I think the intensity would be much more, you know, we probably, it's not necessarily appropriate to have a much more intense seasonal light fixture in a commercial area anyway, and it doesn't necessarily prevent them from still having some sort of seasonal operation there. That's, but it would prevent the strobe lights, the blinking lights. Seems appropriate. We don't necessarily have to prevent the yeah. So and then if that becomes a problem, we could revisit it. But it seems like that was certainly something that I've seen to be problematic in other places.
I would by no means perfect. Generally, I would say that if from a safety distraction perspective, that what you're suggesting would also be consistent, as you're going to have largely more all modes of travel, often on non-residential corridors and districts, as opposed to maybe interior to residential districts. Again, I don't think that's a perfect alignment, but generally, I think that might be another basis to sort of draw that distinction that, you know, you don't want flashing strobe lights for somebody at a really high volume intersection. Something strobing or flashing on a residential intersection, while not ideal, the overall volumes and safety concerns might be less.
So from my perspective, since I put the motion forward, I would take it as a friendly amendment to my motion to restrict that caveat that temporary lighting displays need to comply with the section on flashing, blinking, strobing only in non-residential districts. I can't remember who seconded it, Commissioner Ackerman, so that's friendly to you? Okay. Any more discussion on that? All in favor of the amendment, which would do what I just said, limit the strobing, flashing for those temporary installations in commercial, in non-residential districts. Do you want us to do a roll call vote? Okay.
No, a voice vote is fine for the amendment.
Okay. All raise your hand or say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Raise your hand. Okay, I think I saw everybody, although Commissioner Ackerman, I wasn't sure. Did you vote?
Oh, sorry, I did. I said aye.
Okay,
Raise my-
excellent. All right, so that's everybody. So now we have the main motion that was amended. Commissioner Gibrandel, you had something to add.
Yeah, so I guess some of my thoughts about their amortization and about basically we're trying to get behavior change. And the regulatory world is one way to do it, but I'm reminded of a phone call that came in to the Environmental Commission the last time that we met about a guy who lived up in Escanaba and who was had a passion to try to reduce styrofoam use with food containers in his community. And the state said you can't regulate it. And so he did this huge informational campaign and he got 95% compliance in Escanaba with this because he just reached out to people and made it his mission. And so I think in some ways that will be more effective than regulating it to the extent that, you know, where it's like if you change a light bulb, you have to change it. I think that really that's what we're trying to go for is behavior change. And the regulatory world is one side of that, but there's a whole lot of other tools in the toolbox for that. And I think people just have no clue about what this is about, and that some sort of way to reach out to people is probably going to change more behavior than slapping them on the wrist when they, you know, change something out. I think that like people want to do the right thing generally if they're given the opportunity and the next time they're, so I guess that's my thought on that is that I think that really a lot of these things we do, it's people talking to people, you know, and raising awareness that are some of the biggest tools that we have for these things. So I guess that's my 2 cents on that is that I think that the work is just beginning on this and that I think that it needs to continue way beyond us passing this ordinance. And I'm sure the folks that have been working on it are kind of weary of working on it because it's been a long time coming. But I feel like that's really where we're going to get results. So that's my 2 cents.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Thanks, Chair Mills. I totally agree, Commissioner Gibrandel. I think one of the positive things that can come out of regulation too, even if it's not enforced like full tilt, is that there will be like a news cycle about it. There'll be, I mean, that was a big part of the benefits around the no idling ordinance. Like it's very hard to enforce, but at least there have been like 5 news articles about it. And hopefully, you know, dozens of people read that and said, oh, I didn't realize like if I leave my car idling for 10 seconds, it creates the same amount of emissions as when I turn the engine back on. Maybe that'll inform some behavior. So I totally agree. And I think the two can go well together. But yeah, you're right. We just got to talk to our neighbors for sure.
I'm going to piggyback on that because I am of the same mind. And I think that this is the one place that I wanted to push back or ask a little bit more questions, Mr. Leonard, about your presentation was on the comment about like it being expensive. And I can see for retrofitting, if you're just trying to replace one porch light, right, or add one porch light, and you have to go through and update them all, I could see that adding expense. Part of, do you have, is that the comment, was the comment within that context, or is there evidence that this is going to be more expensive for new construction?
No, I didn't do any, I want to be clear, I didn't do any detailed cost analysis, but I mostly think of it as the ordinance is drafted. We had some conversation about this, previously. Should an electrical permit for your front light require you to replace your backlight in a compliant way? Staff's perspective is that that's not appropriate. If you're replacing the front light, however, if you're replacing it, it has to be compliant. If you're repairing it or maintaining it, you can repair or maintain it. I think the incremental cost is going to come on the site plan side, actually. I don't think it's going to be as significant a cost for a sort of blank slate new project where I don't have enough knowledge to know sort of the availability of compliant fixtures versus non-compliant fixtures and whether there's any cost differential there. If I had to guess, there's probably slightly less choices, but I would also hope that the industry is generally moving in that direction regardless. I think the bigger cost implication is probably for those projects that might be at the administrative or planning commission level. Like, for example, recently you considered proposed improvements for Rudolph Steiner High School, I believe, or no, Green Hills. I forget which Green Hills, I think. So in that case, they were doing improvements to a athletic field. The nature of those improvements required site plan. Under this proposed ordinance, that whole site is going to have to be brought in compliance, because what we're doing is we are looking at the requirements of code for that whole site. So I think in that circumstance, we are going to be potentially increasing the cost of that investment, because it's just adding another cost on top of the sort of focus of perhaps what the initial work is. And that happens with other things. Sometimes it happens with stormwater. Sometimes it happens with parking lots. But I just want to acknowledge that I think that you talked about this, it resonated, that I wanted to bring it up because we were talking about this a little bit at our work session, that as a community, we have added a lot of regulations and from very, not only well-meaning, but appropriate ways to advance very appropriate goals. Cumulatively, that can make development really challenging. And so that was fresh in my mind, and I just want I want our eyes to be open as we think about regulations such as this, that might be fueling that problem. As indicated, I think this is a worthwhile ordinance to pursue. We recommend, but I think in this case, it could, just as I said, incrementally add barriers and challenge affordability of development.
I, first of all, appreciate that you brought that up and that you're thinking, as we're looking at changes to our code, that you're reminding us about our affordability goals and about our sustainability goals. Like, I think that we need to keep those two things top of mind whenever we talk about any ordinance change. And so I think that you're right on what we require in site plans, particularly for redevelopment. If it's new development anyway, they're gonna have to comply. Like, it doesn't make a difference, but it's redevelopment. And in my mind, this is one of the things, this is really timely to be talking about now and hopefully getting passed now, because I reported out to everyone the last ORC meeting, we were talking about what are the triggers? This is the direction from City Council. We're reviewing what are the triggers for site plan review, and should small things require conformance with all of the things within, you're bringing everything up to code for a small change. And that's one of the things that we've been talking about. So I think that putting this in that context is very, very helpful. Where I would just push back is that, maybe there are fewer fixtures. I think, yes, things are moving in that direction. We were pretty careful to try to put things that are not like the farthest out there. We thought these were reasonable, but also that one of the goals of this is to save energy, which should save money. And so, like, for new development, this should not be more expensive. Like, that's the goal of this. And to Commissioner Gibb Randall's point about education, and to what Commissioner Briggs was saying about the operations, like, letting the education component, letting people who have parking lots know you can And in fact, we would encourage you to turn off those lights and save that energy overnight. Like, that's where I think there's a real opportunity. So I'm saying this so that Energy Commission and whoever else, you know, can master that, or, you know, can do that education campaign is aware. I think that there's an opportunity there. Oh goodness. On amortization, the only thing that I would add to that is that there's a lot of things, like a lot of changes that we're going to need energy wise. And I think we need to think about that. We've got a lot of built environment and how we're going to bring things up to be able to reduce emissions. You know, I think Erica and I, you know, did not do nearly as much as Sally Uwe. So I want to make sure that she gets a shout out here. And John Mursky was like at all of these meetings, but we donated a decent amount of time to this over the course of the last year. So I think that this is really important, but like the energy efficiency of so much of our existing housing stock and like how to get that up to snuff is, in my mind, like even more pressing. There are bigger savings there. And so, you know, like Mr. Leonard said, everything has an additional cost. And so like, we need to think about that and how, but also if you're doing one thing, you know, if you're already doing some improvements to tighten things up, like one of the things you worry about is, you know, those electrical things around your electrical outlets and around your electrical fixtures. That's one conduit from the outside to the inside. And so like, are there opportunities to actually make this not so expensive? But we need to think about that beyond just this particular ordinance. So that's the comment that I would have on amortization. And then I see you, Commissioner Sauvé, just so you know, one more thing. I just want to make sure that this works with what we have in the sign ordinance, because the intention, we knew that these things would be coming soon together. The intention was, right, that the lighting associated with signs is a subset of the overall lighting. And so I just want to make sure that it reads that way and that you guys are prepared for that.
Yes, I believe it does. I will, as you mentioned that, I think it would have been something that I did a sort of more detailed analysis for you because it was a topic, but that's something we can make sure that it's clear as it progresses, like how those two interrelate.
And what we had discussed before, I would just remind you and us, is potentially the note within the sign ordinance referencing the lighting ordinance. Clearly, that one has a 2-week you know, head start on this being approved or going to city council for approval. But maybe that's one of the things that needs to be part of that package, if it makes sense to just instead reference this. Commissioner Sauvé.
Thank you. I had, I guess, a logics question about the kind of affordability and discussing it relative to this ordinance versus if we look at parsing out an overall sector of like triggering and then putting a list of things that are in compliance for a smaller project. Because I guess my concern is if we start looking at individual parts of ordinances to say you don't hit a threshold versus in the overall kind of mechanism of the ordinance saying at this threshold you have to hit these ingredients versus this threshold you have to hit more ingredients. So I guess it's a broader question about how we might think about structuring the overall ordinance within those required categories.
I agree with that sort of I don't know, concern maybe. The UDC sets our expectations for development, period. And so the more that we add regulations that say, we are setting this expectation period except for this, this, or this, I think inherently we start adding complexity and complications and compromising the usability of our code. And from an educational perspective, being able to clearly articulate what our expectations are. So I agree with that. And I think that the version that's before you this evening, for example, takes a step in that direction. Previously, the applicability section was a little bit more nuanced. That's not what this does. This says this applies to any outdoor lighting, period. That's the standard we're trying to apply, whether it is a front porch light or a fully developed lighting plan for a, for a PUD along the river. In either circumstance, outdoor lighting shall comply with it. And accordingly, by setting that standard, it is zoning, and I totally understand I think it feels a little different because lighting somehow seems just a little less permanent than maybe a structure, but in the regulatory framework, it is in fact the same. So, but I agree with that conversation. I think some of that might have implications for the site plan thresholds review and what those thresholds are. And one of the things that's part of that is what aspect, should it be all or nothing? Right now, site plan means everything in the ordinance. Maybe there should be site plan, light, which is everything in the ordinance except for stormwater, outdoor lighting, and bicycle parking. You don't have to comply with those things. So, but I think my preference is always just to clearly and as uniformly as we can set our expectations for how this is, what we're trying to ultimately get to, however long it takes.
Thanks. I think that's helpful. And I think for, where we're at discussing the specifics of this one, it's easier to be inclusive, but keeping those notes and those highlights of, what are the low-hanging fruit and the higher, issues once we circle back to that conversation at a higher level. So I appreciate bringing it up. I feel like this as is feels really solid.
Great. Commissioner Woods.
Not to add very much more to what has already been said, but I think this is also an example where you can go over ordinances with a fine-tooth comb so many times. I'm not sure how many years this has been in the making by a number of people who care a lot, who are very expert in it. You think that it's almost ready to go, and then you see that there's something else that perhaps complicates the issue. And those kinds of things are, they add time. I was just sitting here thinking about, now when we get a site development, it just seems normal for us to talk about stormwater. Well, yeah, you're going to have to bring your stormwater up to speed and all like that. And maybe eventually we'll be like that about lighting too. But it just, I really appreciate all the time that everyone puts into it. And just to realize that in some cases, we just can't make it a really quick process simply because it is so complex. So.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, I think we're ready for a roll call vote then, Mr. Leonard, not Commissioner Leonard.
Okay, so the motion is to recommend approval of the proposed outdoor lighting amendments, subject to the amendment to clarify that temporary lights outside of residential districts are subject to the restrictions on flashing, blinking in sub 10 of 5.253 sub B. Agreed?
Yes.
Starting with Commissioner Gibb-Randall.
Yes.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Yes.
Commissioner Sauvé.
Yes.
Commissioner Abrams. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Commissioner Woods.
Yes.
Commissioner Briggs.
Yes.
Commissioner Mills.
Yes.
Commissioner Milstein.
Yes.
It is unanimous.
Very good. So this now goes on to City Council. The next order of business is 9B, which is also amendments to Chapter 55 of the UDC. There are 8 enumerated amendments that I would prefer just to have Alexis walk us through before I read the whole thing, if that's all right.
It's okay with me, but you got to ask her.
All right. I assume that you're going to talk to us about all 8 that are in the little script here. So I won't I won't name them all before you do.
Sure. Thank you. Good evening. I might have missed a second there while I was rejoining, but I'm sure it was all good things. I will be presenting a return of amendments to the UDC. This would be the third batch of amendments where I'm calling this Charlie for file organization purposes. These were proposed to you in July, a month ago in July. We asked for a postponement because we wanted a little bit additional time to work on the use table, which is the last in this group of amendments. I have a simple PowerPoint that I will screen share. No, I won't. I've disabled I am not a host. No matter. But I will run through the amendments for a little bit of a refresher. I will skip over. I won't skip over. I will go
Alexis,
a little bit. Yep.
Alexis, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry. I just set you up as a co-host if you would prefer to use your PowerPoint.
It's helpful for a little bit of a visual, I think, and I think you'd prefer to look at that. Let's run the PowerPoint. No. All right. Here we go. Okay, so we proposed a slate of amendments. I will go through a little bit quickly. Please stop me or ask any follow-up questions, but because we've done this once before, I'll go a little bit faster. We have an amendment that is proposed to the title and the key of table 5.15-1 primary use table and 5.15-2 accessory use table. We deleted the word permitted from the titles, and we deleted unused symbols from the key. We've also proposed an amendment for the section to security for completion of site improvements. This is basically what you have to do in order to get a certificate of occupancy and what kinds of things you can put up a bond for incomplete work. And we are proposing changes to be able to post security for any site improvement. Previously it was, or currently it's limited to landscaping, uninstalled landscaping and pavement. We'd like to do it for any time of the year. We have added limitations for you can't just bond because you're lazy. It has to be for legitimate purposes. We have an amendment to, the permitted building materials in the D1 and D2 districts downtown, and we're going to call out fiber cement board as a trim material only. We proposed an amendment to the way you determine FAR in mixed use zoning districts. So this is not every zoning district, but it's the zoning districts where FAR comes into play. And we're going to say that lot area includes land that's donated for public sidewalk expansion. In all districts, we say that your lot area, your density, your FAR can include lot area you donated for parkland purposes. We're going to add land donated for public sidewalk expansion to that. We have some corrections. In the primary use table in the M2 district, marijuana processors are supposed to be permitted. We're going to check that cell. In the accessory use table, it's a correction to the use table in the R2A district to allow accessory dwelling units. As a small reminder, this was the original intent a few years ago, but through compounding errors and various additions of the UDC that have been approved without this, we're going through a full ordinance amendment rather than just correct it as a scrivener's error. We have a correction to the fence graphic labels for front and yard and side yard. And, oh, I didn't change this. The dimensional tables previously said they were in progress. We have completed them. Here's an example. We have moved a lot of the footnotes from the footnotes into the body of the table for more numbers, less referencing. I only put one example into the PowerPoint, but in the packet is the full amendments for each of the tables. There are 5 of them: a single family dimensional standard table, 2 family, a multifamily table, a mixed use table, and a non-residential and special purpose district table. Staff is recommending approval of these. These will either correct errors or fairly minor changes, but they will improve the functionality and the usability, and they will improve the flow of development in the city. Again, I know that I went through them fast because we did cover this before, but I'm happy to go through any section in more detail. So please fire away.
All right, now we will open the public hearing for this. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about the proposed amendments to the Unified Development Code. Public comment can be made by calling that 877 number. It's 877-853-5247, and then entering meeting ID 985-77-78-76-99. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand, and you can raise your hand by pressing *9 on your phone. Mr. Leonard will call out the last 3 digits of your phone number and let you know that you're free to speak. If you do choose to speak, please mute any background sounds and state your name and record. State your name and address for the record, sorry. We'll give it a little bit of time to see if there's a delay, if anybody wants to call in. I don't see anybody. So
Nope.
We'll close the public hearing and I will read the motion that has all of the numbers in it. The motion is: the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the amendments to Chapter 55 Unified Development Code, sections 5.16.6.d, 5.28.8, 5.17.6.c, 5.17.4, and 5.26.2.a, including tables 5.15-1, 5.15-2, 5.17-1, 5.17-2, 5.17-3, 5.17-4, and 5.17-5 to allow accessory dwelling units in the R2A district, expand security for the completion of improvements, regulate fiber cement boards, provide right-of-way for sidewalks in FAR determination, correct a fence graphic, correct marijuana processor use permission, and correct dimensional standards tables. That is moved by Commissioner Sauvé, seconded by Commissioner Woods. Now we are in discussion. Commissioner Milstein.
Quick question, and this is Alexis or Brett. With regards to the putting up a bond for anything, can you give any examples as to why city staff wants this change? Is there something that's been happening, or a specific reason why we're doing this?
We've seen some we've seen on some multi-building projects and some larger developments. I've got a specific example in the staff report I'll just repeat for everyone. Imagine a largish building that's going to have 50 condominium units in it, maybe a 5-story building, 50 condominium units in it. And so, well, I'll make it up, but so they're supposed to have 50 bicycle parking racks. And so they build the shell of the building, 10 units are complete. And they put all the landscaping in around, and they've got the concrete all poured, and they put in 10 bike racks for the units that are complete. The other ones are not complete, they don't have buyers. We would require them to install we require them to install all 50 units. But because they're not complete, there's no reason to install the other 40 when there's no people that need them at that moment. So that's the kind of thing where it might be useful to bond for. Conceivable similar situation for, say, a project is so large it's supposed to have 3 dumpster enclosures, but they build basically a third of it, and so at the time they only need 1. You can't bond for that right now. So that's examples that we've come through. There have been some where it's not that they don't want to do all of the improvements, but they would like some of the improvements to be a little bit more proportional to what the project is.
Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Woods?
So Alexis, just in terms of that example that you just gave us, are there any reasons why we would not want to do that? Have you had any examples of projects that don't go to completion, but they do? Because I'm assuming they would not have a certificate of occupancy yet either. Or,
Yeah, this would be in order to get that certificate of occupancy.
mhm.
I think an example of where we would say, no, that's not appropriate is they don't want to install any landscaping because it might get torn up by the crews. Like, well, no, that landscaping it goes for each unit. And so the people who move in are entitled to a landscape project. Maybe similar to a playground equipment. They don't want to install the playground equipment because they'd like to use that area for staging. Well, the first residents are entitled to the same amenities as the last residents. So that is not a proportional thing that would not be approved. Also, I think a reason for it is that would not be acceptable is, well, we dropped the ball and we never ordered enough bike racks. So can we just move in without them? No, that's not our fault. That's not proportional and that's not reasonable.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Milstein?
Now I understand why the playgrounds come in first before they start construction even. There's a lot of neighborhoods that have playgrounds with no neighbors around them.
Yeah. I'm big on that the first residents are entitled to all of the same amenities as the last.
I would just add here that I really appreciate the staff offering these amendments up. And I really like how you divided them out between corrections. That again, for those who weren't around, the UDC was a huge undertaking. Alexis did an amazing job, but it was hundreds of pages. There was a sense that something might not make it in the translation. And so we knew that there would be bits and pieces to correct. And so I appreciate making that clear, and also making clear the things that, you know, are updates. And so thank you. I would just say, like, zoning is a living document. And sometimes we're looking at entire sections, but sometimes it's, as Mr. Leonard was mentioning before, you know, it's a single sentence that could be struck or added in or tweaked, a definition that could be tweaked, as we're doing for FAR with the sidewalks, that, you know, it once we do it, it doesn't have to be written in stone forever.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments, and I agree with you. It's meant to be continually revised to both, if you fix something, but also to reflect our current values.
Right. And again, it applies. We know that it only applies for the new things that are coming, that the things that are there right now, like, that's not necessarily the case, but again, continuous improvement. Hopefully we're moving towards those things that are our values. So there's any other comments? Commissioner Briggs.
I was just hoping you could go in, just help explain a little bit more the amendment to donated to 5.17.4, the sidewalks calculation in the FAR. I know it's kind of explained there, but if you could kind of elaborate a little bit more on that for me.
Sure. Let me do a little rejiggering of, I'll get the specific wording here. So where this came up, just one example, one situation prompted us to think about this, but we think it might come up again. So it's worth addressing, we believe. But you know, floor area is based on the lot area, and it's based on the final lot area. And so if any land is donated for whatever reason, or land divisions that's not taken into account. And we recently had a project in the downtown area that the sidewalk was very narrow, and sorry, I'm having a little screen issue. Sidewalk was very narrow, but they were hesitant to donate an 8-foot strip of land because in the downtown you have height, and so 8 feet times many stories, that can really add up to a lot of lost floor area ratio when your land is smaller. So to not penalize someone for doing the right thing, this is where it comes into play. This was the original premise also of taking density before you donate any parkland. We didn't want to penalize anyone and create a disincentive for donating parkland. So this is a not so much an incentive, but at least they are not penalized. In the downtown, we have some streets that are quite the street is fairly wide and the sidewalk means it's fairly narrow. And to get that wide sidewalk comfortable width, there are situations where we're going to need additional land. And we don't want to penalize anyone with their precious square inches, and make it easier for people to contemplate helping out and fulfilling the downtown street design manual and getting the sidewalk widths and all the amenities that we want. It came up on one project, but we think as downtown continues to evolve, it's going to come up again, and we won't run into the same disincentive that we had in the past project.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right, Mr. Leonard, I think we are ready for a roll call vote on the on the motion as in the packet.
Commissioner Ackerman,
Yes.
Commissioner Sauvé,
Yes.
Commissioner Abrams,
Yes.
Commissioner Woods,
Yes.
Commissioner Briggs,
Yes.
Commissioner Mills,
Yes.
Commissioner Milstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Gibrandel.
Yes.
It is unanimous.
Very good. The motion carries. All right. One more item of unfinished business. This is 9C. It's the review of the City Planning Commission bylaws. We'll have the staff presentation, but there's not a public hearing on this. Goodbye.
Yes. As is presented in our current bylaws, and for that matter, the proposed bylaws, the Planning Commission should review the bylaws on an annual basis. This time, we have proposed quite a series of changes. Most of them are largely to provide a bit more consistency with a more common template that other boards and commissions use in the city. They were presented to you previously. To highlight some of the changes, we've simplified some numeric references, made some label changes, for example, members of the public in place of citizens, public comment in place of audience participation, made reference to other city council enacted standards for transparency. They might be beyond the Open Meetings Act. We eliminated specifically the secret ballot provisions for electing officers. We we added planning manager authorization to cancel a meeting in the event where it is determined that no business is clearly going to be on the agenda, or we know that we won't have a quorum. Adjustments to provide flexibility in the order of the agenda if we want to play with the sort of typical structure of our agenda. As I think summarized before, the bylaws had some language that was a bit of a reference to the previous requirements where the Planning Commission, sorry, I just did a bad thing. Hold on. Where the Planning Commission used to hire sorry about that, Commissioner Reynolds. I got a little sloppy with the demotion. Where the Planning Commission used to hire the planning director. The position has actually very deliberately changed since that time. I'm the planning manager, not the planning director, and I'm now responsible to administrative change within the city as opposed to directly to the Planning Commission. So, but that language still maintains the opportunity for your feedback to the community services area administrator on any performance evaluation of me. We've removed the rebuttal opportunity from the public hearing process as discussed in the previous review. I would just ask, I think that the Planning Commission is very effective with that, but I think that works in conjunction with the Planning Commission's long history of being very diligent and sort of responding to questions and sort of threads that come up through the public hearing process and presentation process. So, I added the chair's discretion to extend the speaking time that was originally present in the general public comment to also apply to all public hearings that relate to agenda items. So based on the successful integration, hopefully, of the two items that were of specific interest at the last presentation, I would recommend your adoption of these. After that, it would progress to City Council for their adoption.
Very good. Thanks. I heard it. I was just demoted.
Sorry.
So the motion
I wonder
here is
who will be next.
Exactly. Well, the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission moves to approve the bylaws as presented. Will somebody move that? Commissioner Milstein, seconded by Commissioner Abrams. Discussion of the motion. Commissioner Briggs.
Yeah, there was, thanks for all the updates to these. There was just one section that I had a question about. It was section on membership, section 4.8. It says if a member misses more than 3 regularly scheduled meetings in a row or 4 or more meetings in a 16-month period, the chair shall notify City Council. And I just wanted to clarify, those are, does that mean all meetings, including, regular meetings, working sessions, committee meetings? Is that what that's intended to mean?
I think I would, that's a good question. I would interpret that as regular business meetings. I think the intention is to ensure that there is adequate attendance and presence and ability to conduct business. And in the events that you have an ongoing quorum issue and the like, I think that's where an attendance concern would be most, sort of have the most impact and cause for concern. I don't say that I don't think that working sessions and committee meetings are appropriate, but those are sort of creatures of the Planning Commission as opposed to this, which is really speaking to the Planning Commission at large. So I recognize that I think you could probably read it in numerous ways, but that's how I read it. Is the core concern is we want people who are going to be putting in the time so that we can conduct business.
And I think the intent of that is really good. And I worry a little bit less with the 3 consecutive meetings and more with the 4 in a 16-month period, and a little less when it's just the regular meetings, though that is still 32 meetings, and suggesting that if 4 are missed, that the chair shall send a note to City Council. Hopefully City Council would always be understanding of their volunteer commitments. But I think that I'm a little bit nervous about that shall language around the 4 meetings that members might possibly miss. And especially if that gets interpreted as, those additional meetings, that could be, right now that's 64 meetings that in a 16-month period. period that, somebody like, if you're on the ordinance revisions committee. So I just wondered about changing that language to may versus shall, to, obviously we should be holding these meetings seriously.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah,
wanted to raise that as a point.
Yeah, I did. I think I sort of had under a previous chair, I looked at this and had a discussion with the previous chair, and I think at the time we might have been particularly down a commissioner, and I think at that time and I agreed it didn't seem productive, like when you didn't have a full commission at the outset, to be really spending a lot of time policing this. So I did look at perhaps making this more flexible. The sort of feedback I got from other reviewers in the city is this is pretty consistent with other bylaws for other boards and commissions. And I don't know how much opportunity there is for the planning commission to hold itself out separate from that sort of convention. However, I do think that any such reporting to the city council is going to recognize that the frequency of meetings of the planning commission is distinct from a lot of other boards and commissions. So, I appreciate it. I had the same thought. It didn't seem viable to actually change that because this is a very consistent provision that applies broadly. And I can say in my time here, it's never become an issue in the time I've been here. But in short, I concur with a lot of your observations about it. I think as presented is appropriate.
Commissioner Milstein.
I think this was a year ago. I believe Mr. Leonard and I did discuss it as I was chair. And at that point, we decided just to leave that alone. And so I would, just because it's never been an issue and I've actually never had to send a note to city council during my 2 years as chair. I think this is maybe something that we can discuss next year when we review these again. And maybe meanwhile, between now and then, maybe take a look at what our attendance really is like, and what our dates are for all our meetings, and come up with something that the city attorney's office would be agreeable with. So I don't think it's something that we should postpone on or do any changes, but I think it's something that we should review over the next year. And as we prepare to review the bylaws this time next year, that we might address that at that time.
To be clear, I was totally selling out Commissioner Chair Klein, not Milstein. So
I was gonna say, I feel like almost every year this comes up, like when we review this, because I think, Commissioner Briggs' math on how many meetings we have, it doesn't, it doesn't take much to miss that many. And for better or for worse, COVID means that we're not taking vacations, or because you can be like Commissioner Briggs and join us from vacation. Attendance this summer has been much higher. It's traveling for work or for other things, or getting sick, heaven forbid, right? I mean, all of those things, like some flexibility, recognizing how often we meet, I think is something that we should keep coming back to.
And I think, again, I think the intention is to make sure business is conducted. And I think frankly, it's somewhat valuable to the city council that if there is an issue in being able to accomplish that, having some defined measurement of satisfactory or not. That doesn't mean that it's frankly being policed on this really aggressive way, but it provides a clear delineation if a problem does need to be addressed.
Commissioner Abrams, Commissioner Ackerman, you've been unmuted. I just want to make sure that you didn't have your hand up before, that I missed it. Okay.
No,
Commissioner Abrams.
I just was going to say, I think I support the idea of there being a metric, but the question, I guess, would be what 4 meetings and 16 months, which both seem maybe arbitrary or up, next year we could take it up. And I think the goal for me in that conversation would be to not put the chair in an uncomfortable position, right? So I think that's what Commissioner Briggs was pointing out. This shall inform the city council. So if the chair doesn't, then suddenly they're in breach of the bylaws. More than the commissioners who are absent are in breach of their commitment, right? So, like, in other words, it doesn't say if you miss X number of meetings, then you relieve you give up your seat. It says that the chair has to do something. So anyway,
Well, and to be clear, even if that is reported, it doesn't result in any immediate action. At that point, it's just sharing information.
So, but anyway, so yeah, I would support us taking it up again, I guess, next year. I don't agree that we shouldn't postpone now for that, but.
Any other comments or questions? All right. Do you want a roll call vote, Mr. Leonard?
I'm okay with a voice vote if the board is.
All right. All in favor of the bylaws as drafted, please say aye or raise your hand. Aye. All opposed? That's no one, so it carries unanimously. All right, now we are on to regular business. We have one item here. This is the 559 Riverview Drive annexation and zoning for city council approval. We'll have the staff presentation and then a public hearing.
This is a petition by a property owner at 559 Riverview Drive to seek annexation into the city of Ann Arbor for ultimate access to utility connections. Site is located in the near the Huron River on Riverview Drive. It is in an area that is immediately surrounded by R1B zones and other township parcels. The property is a single family home. The proposed annexation is within the city's proposed service boundaries, and the proposed R1B zoning is consistent with the city's master plan, and we would recommend approval.
All right, now we'll move to the public hearing. Again, it's an opportunity for people to speak for up to 3 minutes about the proposed annexation and zoning of 559 Riverview Drive. You can make public comment by calling 877-853-5247 and then entering meeting ID 985-77-78-76-99. You can raise your hand digitally by pressing *9. Mr. Leonard will let you know when you're able to unmute yourself and join. And please state your name and address for the record.
Callers at this time, let's just give it a few moments.
Sometimes I think I should read that whole thing just to give people additional time to come on.
I see no callers.
All right, then we will close the public hearing and I'll read the motion. It is the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the Wade annexation and R1B single family dwelling district zoning. Moved by Commissioner Milstein, seconded by Commissioner Ackerman. Discussion of the motion. All right, would you like a roll call vote?
Yes, please.
All right.
Commissioner Sauvé,
Yes.
Commissioner Abrams,
Yes.
Commissioner Woods,
Yes.
Commissioner Briggs,
Yes.
Commissioner Mills,
Yes.
Commissioner Milstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Gibb-Randall,
Yes.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Yes.
It passes.
Very good. We are up to item 11, which is audience participation. This is another opportunity to speak. Persons can speak up to 3 minutes about any item of interest. Public comment can be made by calling 877-853-5247 and then entering meeting ID 985-7778-7699. City staff will select callers that have raised your hand by pressing *9. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. And as always, please state your name and address for the record.
No callers.
All right, then we can close the audience participation section and move on to item 12, which is commission proposed business. Is there any this evening? All right, seeing none.
I'm
my
sorry
list-
this meeting's gone so short. I've been giving you such content over the last couple of meetings.
It didn't look like it was going to be short, but very good.
I obviously need to add more.
Does anyone want to make a motion to adjourn? Oh, moved by Commissioner Gibrandal, second by Commissioner Abrams. All those in favor of adjournment, please say yes. Yes.
Yes.
All right. We are adjourned.